A chemist at an Eastern university working with X-ray instruments. One of the questions that invariably comes up is one of, since you can't see these X-rays, how do you know where they're going and what they're doing? So we try and make an analogy to light, which of course everybody can see. X-rays will have a lot more penetrating power than light, but they will be reflected, diffracted, and bounce around and seemingly go around corners. X-ray instruments are like a double-edged sword. They can be quite useful and helpful to you, but they can also hurt you. Now, I know about X-ray safety because I've been there. I've been burned. I've been in a hospital. I've had skin grafts done on fingers, and now my right hand just doesn't work right anymore. I used to do a lot of rock climbing. Now I backpack in the woods and I do some canoeing, but I can't climb rocks because I just don't have the confidence in the skin on my fingers of my right hand anymore.
Ken Rayburn is just one of many people who work with analytical X-ray equipment. What are the factors that, taken together, can create safer conditions for the people in this field? John Vilforth, director of the Bureau of Radiological Health, explains.
The strength of the radiation protection program at the federal level through the Radiation Control for Health and Safety Act is the assurance that equipment used by you is safe. And we have a mechanism of reviewing that equipment to make sure that it meets the acceptable guidelines and standards of industry. Now, we work also with the state radiation control programs, and we have developed model regulations, and these regulations are directed more towards the use of analytical X-ray equipment. And the state programs are most effective, and I'm sure that many of you will run into the state inspectors who visit your facilities.
I'm a radiation health physicist for the state of Pennsylvania's Bureau of Radiological Health. One of its responsibilities is the inspection of all X-ray equipment and users in the state of Pennsylvania. We decided to do a study of all radiation users, and in this study we found that approximately 1.8% of these users are in the class of analytical or diffraction X-ray units. And when we looked farther, it was really surprising to find that 76% of all serious radiation accidents occurring in Pennsylvania occurred within this group of 1.8%, which is really a large number for such a small group of users. So we decided that there was definitely a need to regulate these instruments and to have some say in the fail-safe mechanisms that are to be used with them. There are three important safety devices that should be on all of these machines. One of them is a fail-safe light or sign indicating when the X-ray beam is on. Second one is a shutter to open and close the beam. And a third is some type of interlock so that you can't get your hand into the beam should the sample device be removed. And this unit is really good. It's got all of those, but some of them are really, they're bad.
But where's the X-ray beam?
The X-ray beam. Since these regulations were put into effect, we've had a dramatic drop in the number of injuries occurring. We still find an awful lot of old units when we go around and inspect industries. They're lacking in safety devices. In many cases, the manufacturer can recommend to the user what's necessary to bring his equipment into a condition where it can be used safely.
Well, you know, we know there's a lot of equipment.
The servicemen at Philips Electronics Instruments have to deal with many types of X-ray equipment, both old and new. They have a lot to say about safety, especially as it pertains to older equipment.
There's a case recently heard about in this state of a fellow had the older equipment with no interlocks, and apparently he had some sort of a vacuum problem, and in order to diagnose where the leak was coming from, he pulled the X-ray tube out of the casting to look for maybe a bad O-ring or a crack, and at the time, no interlocks, the equipment was on, and he actually cradled the X-ray tube to his chest, and he got severe burns of the chest, on his arm, both arms, in fact. And here's the case, had the equipment been interlocked properly, he wouldn't have got burned. He wouldn't have had this accident.
That's correct.
Now, the fact was that even on the old equipment,
David Haas, Radiation Safety Officer, represents one manufacturer's point of view. He discusses upgrading in more detail.
You, as a user of X-ray analytical equipment, are faced with a dilemma. You probably have old equipment, and you might be using old equipment, meaning pre-1968, 1970, 1975. You might, in fact, be using very new equipment. The problem is, what do you do with the old equipment? Some of the simple retrofit devices, which actually add a tremendous amount of safety to an installation, are what you see right here. And even though this is new equipment, in fact, the device like a tube shield, which can physically replace an earlier tube shield which did not have automatic shutters, and ultimately a light, a simple X-ray on light, which really tells you that the X-ray generator is operating, that is visible from all the way around, from the complete size of the room. And in addition, this particular light is a fail-safe light. It's very simple that the circuitry provides that if the light bulb burns out, the X-ray generator shuts off. The tube shield in particular is a device which traditionally has had multiple ports. On this tube shield, which has 4 ports, and most diffraction tubes do provide 4 ports, you can be performing multiple tasks simultaneously. Here you see 2 powder cameras, and then there's a diffractometer here. The ports themselves are protected so that the shutter closes if the device is pulled away. In this case, there's a mechanical shutter. When the powder camera is removed, the shutter automatically closes. It's spring-loaded. In addition, there's a physical button, which is the electrical part of the circuitry. And when the camera is pulled back, the button is released and the shutter is electrically closed. So there, in fact, are 2 different independent devices which will protect you once removing the powder camera.
But you can't always rely on automatic or type of safety devices. Sometimes they may fail. I mean, they're supposed you should have good fail-safe items, but there's always a time when there's enough humidity in a room and the corrosion builds up, and maybe a shutter that's supposed to drop just on gravity may hang open, or a light may burn out. There's always these little 1,000 to 1 chances that you may get caught.
What is important is that you as an individual and you as a user of diffraction or spectrographic equipment know the safety considerations, know how safe your equipment is. And frankly, did you ever read a book on radiation safety for diffraction or spectroscopy? Lots of books exist, lots of articles exist. Survey meters cost a couple $100. Have you bought one recently? Did you have yours calibrated? In fact, when was the last time you were sure your film badges were doing what they were supposed to be doing? All of the various safety devices which either are provided or required are no good if you as the user of the equipment don't make it work.
You got to have that attitude to think safety.
You always have to be aware of what's going on, regardless of whether you have automatic equipment or not.
Well, the people have to be educated to be aware. They have to understand what X-rays are and the dangers of X-rays. It's not to fear them, but it's to respect them.
Education, indoctrination, and respect. Many times, the university setting is where this first takes place. Dr. Adler of the University of Maryland gives his views.
Safety in the university laboratory is a unique problem. We're dealing with students that are green, that need to be educated, and we're also dealing with researchers who frequently, in their zeal to get the research done, are likely to throw caution to the winds.
Now, these offer you no immediate protection whatsoever. The earlier you can talk to somebody about safety of X-ray instruments, the better off you are. The more indoctrination they have, the better. Don't ever put your fingers into the sample compartment to check and see what's going on in there. This is how I got an X-ray burn a number of years ago when I was working on an instrument that had some problems. I put my hand inside the sample drawer and got an X-ray burn. And as you can see, it covered 3 fingers here, and it was quite painful at the time. I've had skin grafts since then.
Ken's right. You have to appreciate about the X-rays. There are short-range effects, the sort of thing that Ken is showing you, and there are long-range effects. Now, I understand the 2 of you are married. Is there any truth to this rumor? In that event, you want to be particularly cautious because, you know, X-rays can also have very, very serious effects of that sort. I think the National Academy has established that there really aren't any minimum exposure tolerances when one worries about genetic changes. These badges that you have, as Ken pointed out, are only an indication after the fact that you've been exposed. but they should be a reminder to you to work with total caution at all times. You have to be very, very cautious about X-rays because they tend to scatter and literally turn corners or appear to turn corners. Now, this equipment has been checked and we've tried to take care of possibility of scattered radiation, but you want to be very, very careful. You particularly want to be on guard against your own desire to get your measurements done. Sometimes in an effort to do this, you throw caution to the wind.
Accidents happen really when you're not really concentrating on what you're doing. You do the routine thing day after day. You're not really thinking about, what am I really doing? I know my job, but I'm thinking about something else and doing my job.
Or when someone else gets involved with a piece of equipment that you're working on. Suppose you are working on something and you leave the piece of equipment. Somebody comes along and does something to the machine that you're not aware of, and you go back to work on the machine thinking it's the way you left it. Then an accident can happen.
An accident can happen for many reasons. And for many reasons, they consistently don't happen at Bethlehem Steel.
I would say that our success as a large industrial user is due primarily to the emphasis that we place on the frontline supervisor to oversee the operation, and on personal responsibility that we place up and down the line.
I'm working in the research laboratory 15 years, working with X-ray equipment. It's quite a nice experience, solving for unknowns. Actually, it's not like work. It's a pleasure coming to work. In my laboratory, I sort of take a personal pride in the modifications that I made to the equipment over a period of years. All the safety devices that have been added since the very first X-ray unit that I did have didn't contain any of these.
I don't know what you've thought about as far as making your X-ray unit safer. This X-ray diffractometer has molybdenum radiation, and molybdenum radiation scatter is quite intense at areas up to the eye level. So I provided a lead curtain surrounding the whole X-ray unit and interlocked this curtain to the safety switch so that I can start an operation, and at any given point, if anybody were to open the curtain, it would automatically close the safety shutter, such as this. I'm now turning on the X-rays. The red light inside was also provided to show that the X-ray is on. After setting the job up, I'll open the safety shutter. Now the X-rays are focused on the samples. I close the curtain. The interlocks provided at the bottom of this curtain then are activated with a safety on switch here. And now when I open the curtain, you see that the safety shutter is closed and the operation is completely safe. Well, lead curtains and red lights and interlock switches are, of course, quite important to safety. And one of the most important things I find is to have a written job description, procedures when you're setting up, procedures when you're aligning the camera so that the human error is eliminated.
So these are the written procedures that, of course, we've gone through, but I want to make sure that you check it out. Make sure your X-rays are off, and cover the collimator and the tube with a flexible lead mat.
Did you ever check your tube shields? Did you ever check your powder cameras? How do you know the lead glass has not been replaced in your camera by plain window glass, which happened actually in several installations? Sometimes the glass has been changed to plexiglass, which is even worse than regular glass because regular glass has a higher atomic number and in fact does reduce the X-ray exposure. But when you look down that powder camera to do the focusing, do the alignment, are you sure the X-ray beam is not coming right through? And when was the last time you checked to be sure that your shutters were all operating and all the lights were working? In a tube shield like this one here, we have in fact two lights which tell you that the shutter is open. How do you know that both lights are operating? Do you ever open it to check both lights? That is the type of safety device that, in fact, you as a user can only appreciate and, in fact, assure yourself that it's operating.
The user is important. Also important to Dr. Stanley Block of the National Bureau of Standards are the subjects of designated areas and radiation monitoring.
The National Commission for Radiation Protection and Measurement, after studying the available data, has made some recommendations to protect the general public and the worker. General public can receive up to a ½ rem per year exposure. The worker, because he gets some benefit, at least a livelihood, can receive 5 rem per year as a limit. we do everything in our power to keep below these limits. You can do this in several ways. One of them is to designate certain areas where only qualified workers can enter and the general public is not admitted. Another way to do this is to do a survey of your equipment whenever any changes are made, and even if no changes are made, if it's getting pretty old, things can change, the lead can sag, you can have a leak generate, so they should be surveyed at least, say, every 6 months to make sure that there are no problems occurring.
Any leaks? That's real good.
The important thing here is not necessarily a quantitative measurement. What you want to do is protect yourself and perhaps your future by making sure that any leak that you find is eliminated by shielding or other changes.
Oh yes, 100 MR per hour readings. Those are regions we certainly must limit our exposure.
Think we could pick that up on our badges?
There's been a question about the usefulness of film badges, personnel monitoring devices. This is due to the fact that in the past, the film that was used was not particularly sensitive to X-rays. Also, if you had a device here and the X-ray hit you here, would never know it. But there have been some studies carried out which show that in a substantial number of cases, the first indication of any trouble was the badge. Furthermore, with new and improved badges using TLDs, they are sensitive to the low-energy X-rays.
Right. And I don't believe a film badge is the ultimate answer in X-ray safety.
You need a radiation monitor near the equipment.
Right. You need somebody to say, hey, X-rays are on. You need bells flashing,
lights flashing,
lights
bells
flashing,
ringing.
all that going on.
On new equipment, the internal devices are sufficient to keep the X-rays confined, keep you from exposing yourself inadvertently. On older equipment, we recommend an area monitor such that if X-rays come out, meaning that you do something wrong or been disassembled, there is a device that will detect them, because you yourself have no senses to detect them. And this electronic protection device is in fact your guarantee that you have now received an X-ray exposure. Your film badge does also indicate that you've received an exposure, but it's a passive device. And there should be a clear distinction made in your mind between a passive and an active device. An active device says, there are X-rays coming out of there. Get out of there. Do something. Shut something off.
You can't feel X-rays. You can't see them. You can't smell them. I think it would wake people up if they could actually see some photographs of people with radiation burns. I think this is the best education you can give somebody. If you saw a person with a burn, or even had a conversation with somebody that had an X-ray burn, the agony he goes through, I think this is the best education you give somebody.
Oh, we found out about it on a Sunday. His fingers were swelling, but we didn't realize that he had had the accident. We thought it was because he had dropped a board on his hand building a bedroom.
Tingling and pain in slight degree may appear within a matter of minutes or hours following the exposure to radiation. And then blistering and swelling of the skin.
And we went to the hospital, the emergency room, to have the ring taken off the finger. And they realized that it was serious and said to see his own doctor, which he did.
First, it just looked like he banged it or maybe burnt it, on a pot or something.
Further changes include reddening and ulceration of the skin with focal gangrene developing.
But then it spread to the other hands, and it was really big.
Breakdown of the skin can lead to ultimately infection.
I thought he was going to lose all his fingers. They looked really bad to me. Well, of course, I'd never seen anything like that before.
The spectrometer that we use is a crystal spectrometer doing wavelength dispersion. Modification required the defeating of many of the safety interlock features built into the original spectrometer. On a particular day which my accident occurred, we were doing filter studies on the primary beam from the X-ray tube. And this required placing a filter across the primary beam and then performing analyses with and without the filter. The results of this experiment were quite encouraging, and in an effort to complete the experiment by the end of the day, I hastily removed the filter for the next experiment without turning off the X-ray tube. The exposure to my hand was very short but quite intense, approximately 3,000 rads, and destroys human tissue by first destroying the capillaries, which limit the blood supply, and causing ionization of the body fluids.
I personally believe there were several reasons for the accident, and I don't necessarily think they were all Colin's fault. I think part of it was the location of the warning light, which couldn't be seen easily.
It was approximately 5 months before I was able to return to work, at which point several modifications had been made to the spectrometer to place it in a more safe operational mode. The first was to install a large flashing yellow sign at eye level directly opposite the operator. And secondly, all of the safety interlock features were restored to their original condition.
I was constantly afraid. I thought he would lose all of his fingers. It happened that it was just the tip of one finger that was very bad. And his hand still isn't normal. It's still badly scarred. He still doesn't have the strength in it that he does in the other hand. And there is a possibility of skin cancer, they said, in about 15 years.
In summary, in order to be certain that one has useful results while at the same time being perfectly safe, and when I mean safe, I mean not only for yourself, but for the future generations, you should have a combination. You should have a combination of being careful with designated areas. You should do radiation surveys to eliminate all leakage and unwanted radiation, and use badges and other monitoring devices.
Well, there's many levels of radiation protection, and of course the one that we're concerned with in the federal level is equipment, but equally and most important is the effect of proper use, and this is a responsibility that falls back on your shoulders.
And so the key is to be on guard and to work slowly and carefully, and you'll get your work done, but you must work with caution.
I've been asked myself many times why I work with this hazardous X-ray equipment. And the answer I tell them, in fact, is that it's hazardous only if you use it incorrectly.
I could say my own being. I've been working with it 17 years, and I mean, my own ego. I know about X-rays. I know safety rules and all that, and it can't happen to me because I'm in the business. I know the business. Too familiar, that's it. Maybe being too familiar, you forget a lot.
Scared me very much, yes. Stacy's still waiting for his finger to grow back.